As the airplane began its descent, Olivia Carter's heart pounded. In her pocket sat a lost wallet, one that didn't belong to her. Inside, stacks of cash could change her life forever. But as she glanced at the confused elderly man searching for something, she faced an impossible choice. Welcome to Soulful Stories 86, where we pause, reflect, and explore deeply moving stories. Let's dive into today's story. The golden hues of the setting sun streamed through the airplane window, casting long shadows over the passengers. Olivia Carter sat in seat 22A, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the worn edges of her coat pocket. Inside, her wallet held exactly $47, the last of her savings. It had to last until next Friday. Beside her, her 5-year-old daughter, Lily, slept soundly, her small head resting against Olivia's arm. Olivia gently stroked the soft curls framing Lily's round face. Life hadn't been kind since Daniel, her ex, walked out 2 years ago. Bills piled up, late-night customer service shifts barely covered rent. And yet, despite everything, she had made sure Lily never felt the weight of their struggles. The flight was nearly over. They were returning to Boston after visiting Olivia's grandmother in Chicago, a trip she could barely afford, but couldn't ignore. Grandma Eleanor's health was failing, and Olivia knew this might be the last time Lily got to see her. Even though their emergency fund was now gone, the sight of her grandmother's smile had made it worth it. Just as Olivia sighed, trying to push away the stress, she noticed something. A black leather wallet had slipped from the jacket of the elderly man seated ahead of her. Her breath hitched. She hesitated, glancing around. No one had noticed. Carefully, she leaned forward, picking it up. The wallet felt heavy in her hands. A small fold at the edge revealed $100 bills, several of them. Her mind raced. That money could pay for Lily's overdue dentist bill. It could cover rent for a whole month. It could mean no more skipping meals just so Lily could eat. Her fingers tightened around the wallet. No one had seen her take it. Her conscience screamed at her. But before she could decide what to do, Lily stirred beside her. "Mommy." The little girl yawned, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Are we home yet?" Olivia's stomach twisted with guilt. "Almost. Sweetheart," she whispered. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their final descent into Logan International Airport. Passengers began stirring, retrieving their belongings. The elderly man, who had been napping, reached into his pockets, then frowned. His pale blue eyes clouded with confusion as he patted himself down again. "My wallet," he mumbled, his voice shaky. Olivia swallowed hard. The man was clearly distressed. He fumbled with his bag, his hands trembling slightly. That was when Olivia noticed something else, a medical alert bracelet on his wrist. Her heart squeezed. He reminded her of Grandma Eleanor, who had started forgetting small things lately, like where she put her glasses or what day it was. She thought about how lost her grandmother had looked that morning in the hospital, struggling to recall Olivia's name, and then she looked at the wallet in her hand. The plane landed with a soft jolt. Passengers unbuckled their seatbelts. The man still patted his pockets, his breathing growing shallow. "I had it. I must have had it," he muttered. "Michael was going to meet me. I can't call him without it." Olivia's grip on the wallet tightened. Michael. That must be his son. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Lily, still half asleep, tugged at her sleeve. "Mummy." The nice man looked sad. "Can we help him?" The innocent words sliced through Olivia's guilt like a blade. She had a choice. With trembling fingers, she reached into her pocket, pulling out the wallet. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man turned, hope flickering in his tired eyes. "I think this belongs to you." The moment the wallet left Olivia's hands and landed in the elderly man's grasp, his eyes widened with disbelief. "Oh dear, thank you," he breathed, his frail fingers trembling as they clutched the worn leather. His relief was palpable, but so was his confusion. He flipped it open, nodding to himself as if confirming it was indeed his. "You saved me a great deal of trouble. I was sure I lost it," he mumbled, his voice shaky but sincere. Just then, a tall man in his early 40s, dressed in a dark business suit, approached them, his concerned gaze scanning the crowd before landing on the elderly man. "Dad, there you are," he exhaled, clearly relieved. The old man's lips curled into a soft smile. "Michael, son, I was just looking for you." Michael's eyes flickered toward Olivia, noticing the wallet in his father's hands. "You found this?" he asked, his tone gentle yet laced with curiosity. Olivia nodded. It fell from his pocket on the plane. Michael's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than expected, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Then, he turned back to his father. "Dad, I told you to stop carrying so much cash. What if you had lost it?" The old man chuckled lightly. "Well, I guess I was lucky this young lady was kind enough to return it." Olivia shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't looking for praise. The temptation she had felt only moments ago still left a bitter taste in her mouth. I just did what was right," she murmured. Michael offered her a warm smile. Not everyone would. Before she could respond, Lily tugged at Olivia's sleeve. "Mommy, can I get a cookie now?" she asked, her big, hopeful eyes gazing up at her mother. The question caught Olivia off guard. She had already told Lily no, they couldn't afford it. But before she could explain again, the elderly man chuckled. "You know what? I'd love to buy this little lady a cookie," he said, winking at Lily. Lily's face lit up, but Olivia shook her head quickly. "Oh no, really, that's not necessary." "Nonsense," Michael interjected. "We insist. You helped my father, and this is the least we can do." Before she could protest further, they were already walking toward the airport cafe. The cafe was warm, filled with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and pastries. As they sat, Lily happily munching on her cookie, Olivia found herself engaged in conversation with Michael and his father, Richard Anderson. "So, do you live in Boston?" Michael asked. Olivia hesitated before nodding. "Yes, I work 2 jobs, waitressing during the day and virtual customer service at night. It's tough, but it keeps us afloat." Michael's expression softened. "That sounds exhausting." "It is," she admitted, letting her guard down slightly. Richard suddenly perked up, his blue eyes twinkling. "Michael, doesn't your firm need an office manager?" Michael's brows lifted in surprise. "Dad, he paused, considering something before turning back to Olivia. "Actually, we do. Our previous manager retired last month, and we've been struggling to find someone reliable." Olivia nearly choked on her coffee. "Wait, are you suggesting I apply?" she asked. Incredulous, Michael leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "Why not? You clearly have strong work ethic, and well, if you're anything like what I've seen today, I have no doubt you're more than capable." Olivia's heart pounded. A stable job, better pay, regular hours, no more juggling 2 shifts just to barely scrape by. It was everything she had prayed for. And yet, it felt too good to be true. "I don't know. I don't have experience in an office environment," she admitted. Michael waved a hand dismissively. "We'd train you. Honestly, what matters most is character, and you just proved yours." Richard chuckled. "And besides, my dear, I have a good feeling about you." Olivia's stomach twisted, not from nerves, but from the overwhelming hope creeping into her heart. Was it possible? Could one good deed truly change her life? Before she could fully process it, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text message. Her heart sank as she read it. "Your rent is now officially overdue. Final notice before eviction proceedings." Her throat tightened. She had nothing left. No emergency fund, no backup plan. She needed this job. She looked up at Michael, who was watching her carefully, waiting for her response. And at that moment, she realized this was her chance. Taking a deep breath, she met his gaze and whispered, "When do I start?" The weight of Olivia's decision still lingered in her chest as she and Lily walked out of the cafe, hand in hand. The idea of a stable job was almost too good to be true, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was the turning point she had been waiting for. Yet, just as a glimmer of hope settled in her heart, her phone buzzed again. Another text. "Unknown number. Walk away. Stop now. If you know what's good for you and your daughter." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. Her grip on Lily's hand tightened instinctively. She scanned the bustling airport terminal, her heart pounding. Was someone watching her? Who could have sent this, and why? Her immediate thought was Michael. Had he changed his mind? No, that didn't make sense. He seemed genuine, and his father had been nothing but kind. But someone didn't want her to take this job, and they were willing to threaten her daughter to make sure of it. Olivia didn't hesitate. That night, after putting Lily to bed, she made the hardest decision of her life. She called her older sister, Rachel, who lived in Vermont. "I need to send Lily to stay with you," Olivia whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just for a little while." Rachel immediately picked up on the tension. "Olivia, what's going on?" I don't know," Olivia admitted. "But I need to figure it out, and I need to keep Lily safe while I do." There was a pause before Rachel's soft reply. "Bring her first thing in the morning." Olivia's heart broke as she watched her daughter sleep that night, her small chest rising and falling peacefully. She didn't deserve this, but Olivia would do anything to protect her, even if it meant sending her away. The next day, as Michael gave Olivia a tour of his firm, she tried to ignore the paranoia creeping into her mind. It was a beautiful office, modern, sleek, but welcoming. A real job, a real future, and yet, something still felt off. At one point, Richard, who had insisted on tagging along, suddenly perked up as they walked past a decorative glass wall filled with historical documents. "Oh, look at that," he mused, tapping the glass. "That reminds me of the garden." Michael and Olivia exchanged a glance. "The garden?" Michael asked. Richard nodded, frowning slightly as he seemed to struggle for clarity. Yes, the garden. Where I wrote it all down." Olivia's stomach flipped. What had he written down? And why did it sound like a clue? That night, Olivia couldn't stop thinking about what Richard had said. As she lay awake in bed, she pulled out her notebook and scribbled down everything she could remember. Then, a thought struck her. The wallet. Richard had been carrying so much cash. But why? Had he been planning to pay someone? Hide something? Her mind raced. But one thing was clear. There was something in that garden, and she needed to find out what it was. The next morning, Olivia arrived at Richard's house under the guise of helping him organize his study. Michael had left early for a meeting, which gave her the perfect opportunity. As Richard rested in his chair, flipping through an old photo album, Olivia slipped out into the backyard. The garden was beautiful, with rows of flowers leading to a small greenhouse at the far end, but something felt wrong. There was one rose bush that looked slightly out of place, as if it had been moved recently. Holding her breath, Olivia knelt down and brushed aside the soil. Her fingers hit something hard. A metal box. With trembling hands, she pried it open. Inside was a weathered leather journal. The name Richard Anderson was scrawled across the cover. Olivia's hands shook as she opened it, and what she read inside made her blood turn ice cold. Entry 1. I fear something is happening at the firm. I found discrepancies in the financial records, and someone is trying to silence me. Entry 2. I overheard Michael's business partner discussing an insurance policy against me. I'm beginning to think my own son may be involved. Entry 3. If anything happens to me, the evidence is hidden in the code. 729413. Olivia's breath hitched. Michael's business partner. He had never mentioned anything suspicious. And the code. What did it mean? She barely had time to process it before she heard footsteps behind her. She whipped around and came face to face with Michael's assistant. Henry. You shouldn't have found that, he said, his voice dangerously calm. Before she could react, she felt a sharp prick in her neck. Darkness swallowed her whole. A life or death situation. When Olivia came to, her hands were tied behind her back. Her head pounded. She was in a dimly lit basement, the air thick with dust and fear. A figure stood in front of her, Michael, but his expression wasn't the one she knew. It was cold, detached. Her stomach sank. You were never supposed to see that journal, he said quietly. Her heart shattered. Was it true? Had he really been involved? She fought against the panic rising in her throat. I don't understand. Was it all a lie? Michael's jaw tightened. But before he could answer, a loud crash sounded from above. The door burst open, And standing there, bathed in the light of the stairwell, was Richard Anderson, holding a gun. Richard Anderson stood in the doorway, gripping the gun with surprising steadiness, his eyes, once clouded with confusion, now burned with sharp clarity. Michael turned, his face shifting from cold indifference to something unreadable. Olivia's heart pounded against her ribs, her body frozen in place as the weight of the moment settled over the dimly lit basement. "Dad, put the gun down," Michael said. His voice measured. Richard's hand did not waver. "No, son, you need to explain. Right now." A flicker of hesitation passed over Michael's face before he let out a slow breath. "It's not what you think." Olivia's mind raced, trying to understand. The journal had painted a damning picture. Had Michael really been part of this conspiracy, or was there something else at play? Henry, still standing near Olivia, shifted uneasily. His expression was one of frustration, like a man caught between orders and his own fear. He took a step forward, but Richard's gaze snapped to him, the barrel of the gun following. "Stay right where you are," Richard ordered. His voice, though aged, carried authority. "Olivia, are you hurt?" She shook her head, her throat too tight to form words. Michael lifted his hands in surrender. "Dad, listen to me. I didn't know about any of this until a few days ago. When Olivia found your journal, I started looking into things myself. Henry isn't working for me, he's working for them." Olivia's breath caught. "Them?" Michael nodded. "The same people who wanted you silenced, Dad. The same people who sent that text to Olivia last night." A slow understanding settled into Olivia's chest. Could it be possible? Had she been wrong about Michael? She turned to Henry, whose face had gone rigid. "You're lying." Henry hissed. "She wasn't supposed to find the journal, and you weren't supposed to question anything." "Michael." Richard took a step forward, his grip tightening on the gun. "Who are you working for?" A sinister smile spread across Henry's lips. "You're already dead. Old man. You just don't know it yet." Before anyone could react, he lunged. The gunshot echoed through the basement. Olivia squeezed her eyes shut, expecting pain, expecting the worst. But when she opened them, Henry was slumped against the wall, a deep crimson stain spreading across his shirt. Richard stood firm, his hands trembling slightly now, but his resolve unshaken. He wasn't going to talk. Michael exhaled sharply, rushing to Olivia and quickly untying her hands. She winced as she flexed her fingers, blood rushing back to them. Her heart still pounded, her mind spinning from everything that had just unfolded. "Are you okay?" Michael's voice was softer now, concern overtaking the hardness from earlier. She nodded, but there was no time for relief. Footsteps pounded from above. More were coming. "We need to get out of here," Michael said, pulling Olivia to her feet. "Now." Richard took a deep breath, tucking the gun into the waistband of his trousers. "There's a back exit, this way." They hurried through a narrow hallway, the walls damp and cold. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, closer. Olivia's pulse raced. She didn't know who was chasing them, but she knew one thing: they couldn't afford to get caught. The door at the end of the hall creaked open, revealing a hidden exit that led to the back of the estate. Fresh air hit Olivia's face, but she didn't stop to breathe it in. Michael grabbed her hand and ran, pulling her with him as Richard followed. The night was dark, but the city lights in the distance guided them forward. A single car sat parked at the edge of the property. Olivia barely had time to process before Michael opened the door, ushering her inside. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Breathless, somewhere safe," Michael replied. His jaw was set, his grip tight on the steering wheel. "But first, we need to stop them." Olivia turned to Richard, who sat in the back seat, his gaze distant. He looked tired, but there was something else there too. A quiet strength, a determination. "You remembered," she said softly. Richard blinked and looked at her. A small, weary smile tugged at his lips. "Not everything, but enough." Michael pulled out his phone, his fingers flying over the screen. "I have proof now," he murmured. "Financial records, emails. And with Henry gone, they won't know what's coming." A cold realization settled over Olivia. You planned this, didn't you? Michael glanced at her, his expression unreadable. I knew there was corruption. I just didn't know how deep it went. Not until you found that journal. That was the last piece of the puzzle. Olivia sat back in her seat, her mind reeling. She had come so close to believing Michael was the enemy, and now he was her only ally. The city lights blurred past as the car sped forward. Olivia exhaled slowly, her fingers still shaking from adrenaline. She had been searching for stability, for safety. Instead, she had found something far greater. She had found the truth. Michael gripped the wheel tightly, his jaw clenched, as they sped through the empty streets. Olivia sat beside him, her mind racing, trying to process everything. Richard sat quietly in the back, his hands resting on his lap, eyes flickering between moments of clarity and distant memories. The weight of the night hung heavy between them. The safe house was a modest townhouse on the outskirts of the city, hidden behind tall hedges. Michael parked quickly, ushering them inside. Olivia felt her pulse slow slightly as the warmth of the house wrapped around her, but the tension in her chest remained. Richard sank into the couch, rubbing his temples. I thought I was losing my mind, he murmured. For months, I couldn't remember what I knew, but it was all there. I just needed to see it. Michael knelt beside him. Dad, you did great tonight. We have what we need. Now, we bring them down. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, and he grabbed it immediately. It's done. The FBI has the files. They're moving in. Olivia exhaled. It was finally over. A knock at the door made her heart jump. But Michael stood, checking the peephole before opening it. 2 federal agents stepped inside, their expressions serious. One of them, a woman in a dark suit, nodded at Michael. We've secured the estate. Henry's gone. But we've apprehended the others. The evidence you provided was enough to launch a full-scale investigation. Richard sat up straighter, his old strength returning. So, they'll pay for what they did. They will, the agent confirmed. And Mr. Anderson, your safety is now our priority. We have measures in place to ensure nothing like this happens again. Relief washed over Olivia, but exhaustion followed close behind. The weight of the past few days finally caught up to her, and she sank onto the couch beside Richard. Her body ached, but her heart felt light for the first time in years. Michael sat next to her, his warmth grounding her. It's really over, he whispered. She turned to look at him, studying his face. For the first time since meeting him, there was no tension in his eyes, just relief, just gratitude. Richard yawned, leaning back, his body finally allowing itself to rest. Olivia smiled softly at him. You should sleep. I will, he said, voice lighter than before. But first, I want to see my granddaughter. Her heart squeezed. Lily. Michael stood, already pulling out his phone. She's safe. I made sure of it before we left. I can call Rachel now. She grabbed his wrist, stopping him gently. No, I want to go to her. The drive to Vermont was quiet. Olivia watched the sunrise paint the sky in soft golds and pinks, a stark contrast to the chaos of the night before. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, anticipation buzzing beneath her skin. When they pulled into Rachel's driveway, Olivia barely waited for the car to stop before she threw open the door, rushing toward the house. The front door swung open, and there she was, Lily. Her small feet pounded against the wooden floor as she sprinted toward her mother, arms outstretched. Olivia caught her, pulling her into a crushing embrace, tears spilling down her cheeks. Mommy, you're back. Lily's tiny fingers clung to her, her face buried in her shoulder. I missed you. I missed you too. Baby, Olivia whispered. So much. Michael stood a few feet away, watching them with a soft smile. Richard stepped beside him, his eyes full of warmth. Rachel approached, her gaze flicking between Olivia and the men who had accompanied her. You have some explaining to do, she teased, though there was clear relief in her voice. I do, Olivia admitted, wiping her eyes. But first, let's go home. 2 weeks later, Olivia found herself sitting across from Michael at a quiet cafe, her fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee. The last few days had been a whirlwind. The investigation had made national headlines, Richard had given a heartfelt statement, clearing his son's name and exposing the corruption that had nearly taken everything from them. And Olivia had finally breathed. Michael set his coffee down, his eyes searching hers. What now? She smiled softly. Lily and I need a fresh start, a real one. His fingers tapped against the table, a nervous energy radiating from him. I was hoping you'd say that. He took a slow breath, because I want to be a part of that start. If you'll have me. Her chest tightened, a warmth spreading through her ribs. Michael, I know it's fast, he admitted, but I also know that you are the bravest woman I've ever met. That Lily is the kindest, smartest little girl, and that my father already adores her. She laughed, shaking her head. She adores him too. Then let's make this official, he said. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box, but when he opened it, there was no ring. Inside sat a tiny, delicate key. To the house my father left me, he explained. It's too big for just him, and too empty for just me, but I was thinking. He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. Maybe it doesn't have to be. Her heart stuttered. You're asking me to move in with you. I'm asking you to consider building a life with me, he corrected gently. No pressure, no expectations, just a real chance. Tears pricked at her eyes. She thought about all the times she had dreamed of a home, a real home, not just a place to sleep, a place where Lily could be happy, where laughter could fill the walls. She reached forward, closing his fingers around the key. Okay, she whispered. Michael exhaled, his shoulders finally relaxing. Yeah, she confirmed, smiling through her tears. Richard arrived moments later, Lily running toward him, her face bright with joy. The sight of them together made Olivia's heart swell. Michael leaned closer, whispering, "This is just the beginning." And for the first time in years, she truly believed it. The truth of this story lies in its ability to resonate with us. Although inspired by true events, this story has been dramatized. The names, characters, places, and events in this story are entirely fictitious. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental.